The Force had seen many things in its long, ancient memory. It had witnessed the rise and fall of the Old Republic, the genocide of the Jedi Order, the burning of Ossus, and the slow, grinding horror of Darth Krayt's iron fist closing around a galaxy, already broken by centuries of war. It had felt the births of Skywalkers and the deaths of Sith Lords. It had stretched across star systems and whispered through the living hearts of billions. It had never felt anything like this. The anomaly appeared without warning above Coruscant's upper atmosphere, not a ship, not a missile, not a force projection. A streak of pure golden white. Lightning punched through the thermosphere at a velocity that sent shockwaves rippling across 3 orbital defense platforms and scrambled every sensor array within 40 kilometers. Imperial traffic control screamed alerts across 17 frequencies simultaneously. TIE pilots banked hard to avoid the afterburn of something moving so fast it barely registered as matter. Bart Allen hit the upper cityscape of Coruscant level 5,500 like a comet. He skipped across 3 landing platforms, sheared through a holographic advertisement for Imperial conscription, bounced off a Durasteel support column hard enough to leave a human-shaped dent, and finally came to a grinding, sparking halt against the base of a defunct power relay tower. He lay there for approximately 4 seconds, which, for someone who processed time the way Bart Allen did, felt like an eternity of confused, disoriented darkness. Then he sat up, shook his head, and looked around. Okay, he said to no one. That was bad. He was 17 years old. Give or take the complicated time travel mathematics of his own birth. And he had seen things that would break most adults permanently. He had run through the time stream. He had died and come back. He had fought gods, paradoxes, and the literal embodiment of death. He was not, by any reasonable metric, easy to rattle. This rattled him. Coruscant in 137 ABY was not the gleaming city planet of the Republic's golden age. Krayt's empire had left marks everywhere, propaganda banners in Imperial crimson hanging between skyscrapers, Sith insignia etched into public monuments where the old Senate seals used to be, and an atmosphere of compressed fear so thick it was almost visible. The lower levels were darker than Bart had ever seen a city. The artificial lighting guttered and inconsistent, and the people who moved through the narrow walkways did so with their heads down and their hands close to their bodies. Nobody looked up. Nobody made eye contact. It was the body language of a population that had learned, through hard and terrible lessons, that being noticed was dangerous. Bart pulled himself to his feet and immediately reached for the Speed Force. It was there, but wrong, diminished, like trying to drink from a river that had been reduced to a trickle. His connection to that fundamental energy that had defined him since childhood, that had been as natural and constant as breathing, felt muffled, distant, as though it existed behind several layers of something he couldn't identify or push through. He could still move fast. He could still think fast. But the deep well of infinite speed that normally sang beneath his skin was quiet. And that quiet was terrifying in a way he didn't have words for. He filed the problem under urgent and looked around again. The architecture was wrong for anything in his frame of reference. Too alien, too angular. With technology that seemed both advanced and strangely familiar, energy weapons he could roughly identify, repulsor vehicles that worked on principles he could intuit, but overlaid with aesthetic and engineering choices that belonged to no Earth culture he knew. Alien species moved through the crowds, not the carefully designed movie aliens of his worlds. Science fiction, but genuinely, profoundly alien beings. Creatures with biology so varied it suggested a galaxy that had been evolving intelligent life for millions of years. A patrol rounded the corner. For soldiers in white armor, not perfect white, scratched and worn with campaign service, marching in formation with long-barreled rifles carried at ready. Bart clocked their equipment in the half-second it took them to turn, assessed threat level, and pressed himself silently into the shadow of the power relay tower. They passed without looking in his direction, their helmeted heads scanning the walkway ahead with the mechanical sweep of people following protocol, rather than instinct. He let out a slow breath. His costume was intact, the flash suit, red and gold, designed to withstand the kinetic forces of near light speed movement, but it was conspicuous in a way that could become a serious problem very quickly. He needed information. He needed to understand where he was, when he was, and most urgently, why the Speed Force felt like it was being filtered through a wet blanket. High above the lower city, on a platform overlooking the sprawling urban darkness, a figure in black robes paused. She was Sith, one of Krait's hands, trained to feel disturbances in the Force the way a physician feels a fever. And what she felt now made her go very still. Something had arrived on Coruscant. Something that didn't fit any category in her extensive experience. It resonated in the Force like a living being. But the energy signature was wrong, not dark side, not light side, not the cold precision of a Force null, but something else entirely. Something that moved through the Force the way lightning moved through water, finding its own path regardless of the established channels. She touched the comm unit at her wrist. "Lord Nile," she said quietly, "we have something unusual. If you want to see more characters collide with legendary sci-fi galaxies, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see next in the comments below." The Undercity of Coruscant had its own ecosystem, a shadow civilization that existed in the spaces the Empire's light didn't reach. Level 1313 and below was a different world entirely, governed by different rules, different currencies, and a different understanding of survival. Down here, Imperial patrols were less frequent, but more brutal when they appeared. The criminal syndicates that filled the power vacuum left by the Hutts, diminished influence, ran their operations openly, and the people who lived in the permanent, artificial twilight of the lower levels had developed a finely tuned instinct for danger. Bart moved through it at a fraction of his normal speed, trying to look like someone who belonged. He had found clothing, a worn jacket and utility pants liberated from an unattended vendor stall, left behind credits from his belt pouch that turned out to be completely worthless in this economy, and felt genuinely bad about it for approximately 3 seconds before deciding survival outweighed etiquette. The Flash suit was compressed into a secondary layer beneath the civilian clothes, accessible in an instant if needed. He had also, in the 47 minutes since his arrival, managed to absorb the basics of Galactic Basic Standard by speed reading every piece of written text he could find, signage, propaganda notices, discarded datapads, the scrolling news feeds that played on cracked screens in Cantina windows. The news feeds were deeply, profoundly alarming. Darth Krait, Emperor of the Galaxy. One Sith. A Jedi massacre at Ossus. Imperial Knights serving a deposed Emperor Roan fell somewhere in exile. A bounty hunter named Cade Skywalker wanted across 17 systems. A galaxy in the middle of a war that had already been going on long enough that people had stopped expecting it to end. Bart sat in the corner of a cantina that smelled like 3 different kinds of smoke and at least one chemical he couldn't identify, nursing something blue and carbonated that the bartender had pushed at him when he'd asked for water, and thought very carefully about his situation. The Speed Force problem was the priority. Without full access, he was still faster than anything biological he'd encountered so far. His residual personal speed reserve was significant, built up over years of running, but it was finite. It didn't replenish the way it should. Every burst of serious speed drew from a pool that refilled slowly, incompletely, as though whatever universal energy sustained the Speed Force in his home dimension was either absent here or present in such a different form that his body couldn't properly process it. He had a theory. The Force, this omnipresent energy field he kept reading about, that apparently connected all living things in this galaxy, felt adjacent to the Speed Force in ways he couldn't fully articulate. Not the same, not interchangeable, but resonant, like 2 instruments playing in different keys that occasionally hit harmonics. If he could understand the relationship between them, he might be able to adapt, might be able to draw on the Force the way he drew on the Speed Force, or at least use it as a bridge to stabilize his existing connection. He was still working through the implications of that when the cantina went quiet. Not the gradual quiet of a crowd noticing something interesting. The sudden, total quiet of people who have collectively decided to become invisible. 3 figures had entered through the main door. They were human-shaped, dressed in dark robes that moved with practiced deliberateness, and each carried a lightsaber at their hip, not the elegant, Dignified weapons of the Jedi Order Bart had read about in his hasty research, but something that felt heavier with intent. The Sith insignia was subtle on their collars, but unmistakable to anyone who'd just spent 40 minutes reading Imperial propaganda. The lead figure was a woman, sharp-featured and unhurried, scanning the cantina with dark eyes that moved with professional thoroughness. Sith, looking for something. Looking for him, Bart realized, roughly 2 seconds before her eyes stopped moving and found him across the room. The thing about Bart Allen that most people underestimated was that his speed wasn't just physical. His mind ran at the same velocity as his body, processing, calculating, predicting. In the time it took the Sith woman to register that she'd found her target and begin reaching for her lightsaber, Bart had already mapped 4 exit routes, assessed the structural integrity of the cantina's back wall, estimated the reach of her weapon, and decided that running was smarter than fighting something he didn't fully understand yet. He ran, not at full speed, he couldn't afford the drain, but fast enough that to the cantina's occupants he simply ceased to be present, leaving behind a brief static crackle of residual lightning and a swinging back door. He was 3 levels down and moving before the Sith woman's lightsaber had fully ignited, weaving through maintenance, corridors and cargo lifts with the instinctive spatial mapping that came from years of navigating the Flash Museum's labyrinthine storage levels at velocity. Behind him, he felt something he had no name for, a pressure in the air, a kind of reaching. The Force, he understood instinctively. She was tracking him through the Force, following the trail of that strange, resonant energy his Speed-Force connection left in its wake. Every time he moved fast, he lit up like a beacon to anyone sensitive enough to feel it, which meant slowing down made him harder to find, but also made him vulnerable to the physical pursuit already mobilizing above. He'd clocked 2 more robed figures moving to intercept positions before he'd cleared the cantina. He ducked into a maintenance alcove and pressed himself flat, breathing deliberately slow. For seconds passed, then a voice from directly behind him, calm and deeply unimpressed, said, "You're not Sith. You're not Jedi. You move like nothing I've ever tracked, and you've somehow managed to make Darth Niles' personal agents look incompetent in the span of 1 afternoon." A pause. "I'm almost impressed." Bart turned slowly. The young man leaning against the alcove wall had the kind of face that had seen too much and processed it poorly, sharp features, beneath disheveled blonde hair, dressed in the functional clothes of someone who moved between worlds frequently and cared very little about appearances. A lightsaber hung at his hip, with the casual ease of someone who'd grown up around them. His eyes were pale, assessing, and carried the specific weariness of a person who had been running from something important for a very long time. "Cade Skywalker," Bart said, because he'd read the wanted bulletins. "You're worth a lot of credits, apparently." Cade's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "So are you now. Welcome to the Empire, whoever you are. You've been here less than a day, and you've already made the worst possible enemies." He tilted his head. "So, what are you?" Cade Skywalker did not trust easily. This was not a personality flaw so much as a survival adaptation. The galaxy in 137 ABY had a way of converting trust into obituaries, and Cade had attended enough funerals, real and metaphorical, to have learned the lesson thoroughly. He trusted his crew. He trusted his ship. He trusted the bottle in his hand more than he trusted most sentient beings. And he had complicated, unresolved feelings about the Force that he expressed primarily through aggressive avoidance. He did not, by any reasonable measure, trust the red and gold blur currently sitting across from him in the Minix cramped common area, eating everything in the ship's food storage with the focused intensity of a being whose metabolism operated at a fundamentally different rate than standard humanoid biology. "You're going to explain the lightning," Cade said flatly. Bart swallowed something that had been labeled as protein ration and tasted like cardboard soaked in sadness. "Speed Force. It's okay. Imagine the Force, but specifically for speed. And it exists as a separate energy dimension that connects all fast things across time and space." He paused, registering Cade's expression. "That means nothing to you. Less than nothing, right?" Bart set down the ration pack. "Short version, I'm from a different universe. I run fast. My power source doesn't work properly here because whatever fuels it doesn't exist in your galaxy, or exists in a form I can't fully access. I got pulled through a dimensional anomaly during a time travel mission that went wrong, which, honestly, happens more than you'd think in my line of work. And I ended up here. He gestured broadly at the ship around them. Wherever here is. 137 ABY, Cade said. After the Battle of Yavin. After the Galactic Civil War. After the Yuuzhan Vong. After the Second Galactic Civil War. After approximately 100 years of increasingly exhausting galactic catastrophes. He picked up his own ration pack without opening it, turning it over in his hands. And now Darth Krait's one Sith run everything. My family name is either a death sentence or a bounty, depending on who you ask. And apparently you've arrived to make things more complicated. I don't mean to make things complicated. Nobody ever does. Cade finally looked at him directly. What I want to know is why you read like the Force to anyone sensitive. You're not Force sensitive. I'd feel that differently. But you leave a signature. A trail. Whatever your speed power is. It resonates with the Force in a way that's going to make every Sith in this city want to dissect you. Bart had been thinking about exactly this since the cantina. I think the Speed Force and the Force are related somehow. Not the same. The mechanics are completely different. But they touch the same underlying fabric. The energy that holds the universe together. In my dimension it expresses as speed. In yours it expresses as the Force. When I use my speed here, I'm essentially playing a frequency that your galaxy's energy field recognizes. Cade was quiet for a long moment. Despite himself, Bart could see him processing this, the reluctant intellectual engagement of someone who was considerably smarter than they typically let on. That's either the most profound thing anyone said to me about the Force, Cade said slowly, or complete nonsense. Could be both, Bart offered. Before Cade could respond, the ship shuddered. Not turbulence, not mechanical failure. Something had impacted the outer hull with precision, the controlled, localized strike of a grappling line rather than weapons fire. Cade was on his feet before the sound finished echoing, lightsaber in hand, and Bart was beside him in the same instant, the flash suit already replacing his civilian jacket as he shed it mid-movement. How many? Bart asked. Cade's eyes went distant for a fraction of a second, reaching through the Force with the instinctive ease of someone who resented the ability but used it anyway. 6. 2 on the hull. For coming up through the docking clamps. His jaw tightened. They're Sith. Not just agents. These are trained blades. Nal sent his best. How good is his best? Good enough that I was planning to be 3 systems away before they found me. Cade ignited his lightsaber. Blue-white, a color Bart found interesting given everything he'd read about the young man's complicated relationship with the Jedi, and moved toward the corridor. Can you fight? I've fought, Bart said carefully. Things that make Sith Lords look like a scheduling inconvenience. Cade shot him a look that was equal parts skepticism and desperate hope. Prove it. The first Sith came through the side hatch, with the explosive efficiency of someone who had breached ships before, rolling into the corridor and igniting a red blade in a single fluid movement, already swinging before they'd fully registered their targets. Bart was not where the blade went. He was already behind the Sith, moving at a speed that left a crackling thread of golden lightning in the corridor air, and his palm strike to the back of the Sith's neck, dropped them like a deactivated droid. Not dead. Bart had calibrated the Force precisely for unconsciousness, but profoundly, immediately offline. He felt the Speed Force drain tick slightly. Manageable. The second and third came together, and these were better. They adjusted their attack pattern instantly, one going high with a Force-enhanced leap while the other swept low, a pincer designed to catch anyone who dodged either strike. Cade took the high attacker, blue blade meeting red in a cascade of sparks, moving with the rough-edged competence of someone self-taught and battle-proven. Bart took the low sweep by jumping it entirely, landing on the Sith's extended blade arm with precisely enough weight to hyperextend the elbow, and using the momentum to spin into a strike that removed them from the fight with clinical efficiency. The remaining 3 heard the sounds of their colleagues losing and adjusted their approach. They stopped rushing. They spread out, moving with deliberate patience into the corridor from 3 different access points. And the one who appeared to be leading them, older, with the particular stillness of a Sith who had survived long enough to become genuinely dangerous, studied Bart with cold professional interest. You move through the Force like lightning, the lead Sith said. Lord Nile wants to understand how. Lord Nile, Bart replied, is going to be disappointed. The lead Sith raised one hand. What came from it was not a lightsaber, it was Force lightning, raw crackling darkside energy, and it crossed the corridor distance in a fraction of a second. Even at diminished capacity, Bart's reflexes were sufficient to dodge the majority of it. But the edge of the strike caught his left side, and the pain was immediate and genuine. Not the clean shock of electricity, but something deeper, something that resonated unpleasantly against his speed force connection and sent a spike of drain through his reserves that he hadn't anticipated. He filed that information urgently. Force lightning specifically interfered with his power. That was important. That was a vulnerability he needed to account for. Cade appeared at his shoulder, having dispatched his own opponent, and the two of them stood in the narrow corridor facing three Sith blades with the particular calm of people who had run out of better options. The back hatch, Cade said quietly. 30 seconds. I can give you 30 seconds, Bart said. Go. What happened in those 30 seconds would later become something Cade Skywalker described, when pressed, as the most disorienting thing he had ever witnessed. And Cade had witnessed a great deal. The boy in the red suit moved through the confined corridor space at speeds that made targeting through the Force nearly impossible, not because he was invisible to Force senses, but because he was simply operating faster than a Force user's combat precognition could adequately process. He didn't fight the Sith so much as he systematically removed their ability to fight, disarming, redirecting, and briefly incapacitating, with the focused precision of someone for whom speed was not a power but a language. He burned through more reserves than he wanted to admit. By the time he pulled back through the hatch Cade had opened, his hands were shaking slightly with the specific tremor of someone running below comfortable power thresholds, and the golden lightning that normally crackled around him at speed had dimmed to occasional sparks. The Minnoc broke Atmo 30 seconds later, punching into the upper cloud layer with the screaming effort of a ship whose pilot had bypassed three safety governors simultaneously. In the cockpit, as Coruscant fell away below them and the star field opened ahead, Cade looked sideways at Bart. Something in his expression had shifted. The careful, maintained distance of a man who trusted no one had developed a hairline fracture. You're running out of power, Cade said. Not a question. Bart looked at his hands. The tremor was fading, but the drain was real. The Force lightning specifically, he said. It interferes with my connection. Drains it faster than normal use. He paused. I need to figure out how to either protect against it or find a way to stabilize my speed Force connection using the Force itself. Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring at the star field. I know someone, he said finally, with the tone of a man making a decision he already regretted. She understands the Force better than anyone I've ever met. She'll think this is fascinating. He made the word sound like a minor catastrophe. She's also going to want to help you, which means I'm going to have a conversation I've been avoiding for approximately 2 years. Who? Bart asked. Cade's expression did something complicated. My mother. Vendaxa was a living planet in the truest sense. A world so saturated with interconnected biological systems that the Force sang through it like wind, through an instrument, built from an entire ecosystem. Predators and prey existed in constant lethal balance. Every creature wired into the same vast web of survival. And the Force presence was so dense that stepping onto its surface felt, to anyone sensitive, like submerging into deep water. For Cade Skywalker, who spent considerable energy pretending his Force connection was a minor inconvenience, rather than a profound and demanding inheritance, Vendaxa was approximately the last place he wanted to be. He landed the Minnoc in a clearing that had been a clearing the last time he'd visited and had since become aggressively less so, the jungle having made significant territorial claims against the small permacrete platform his mother's outpost used as a landing zone. He sat in the pilot's seat for an extra moment after powering down, staring at the green wall of vegetation, pressing against the viewport with the expression of a man preparing for a difficult medical procedure. She knows we're here, he said. She always knows. Bart, whose speed force reserves had partially stabilized during the hyperspace jump, slowly, incompletely. The trickle refill that passed for recovery in this galaxy was watching the Treeling. The Force. The Force. Cade stood. Don't tell her everything immediately. She'll ask questions for 6 hours, and we don't have 6 hours. They were met at the outpost door by Morgan Cord, and separately, more importantly, by Jedi Master Ceylon Wes, who had been sheltering here for the past several months while the one Sith's purge of surviving Jedi made most of the galaxy uninhabitable for anyone who could touch the light side. Cade's mother was a woman whose entire biography was a sequence of difficult choices made under impossible circumstances, and she assessed Bart with the particular precision of someone who had spent decades in intelligence work. Wes was older, quieter, and her force presence was deep and still in the way of someone who had survived catastrophe by becoming very good at remaining calm. Wes felt Bart's energy signature and went completely motionless. What? She said carefully. Are you? He gets that a lot, Cade said. The explanation took 2 hours rather than 6, which Cade considered a personal victory. Wes listened with the focused attention of a scholar, encountering a primary source text, asking precise questions at precise moments and processing the answers with visible intensity. By the time Bart had finished describing the Speed Force, its nature, its mechanics, his current compromised connection to it, Wes was sitting cross-legged on the outpost floor with her eyes closed, reaching through the Force toward him with an expression of deep concentration. There, she said quietly. I can feel it. The resonance. She opened her eyes. Your Speed Force exists as a parallel expression of the same fundamental energy the Force draws from. In your universe, that energy found a different channel, velocity rather than living connection. Here, your channel is narrowed because the ambient energy is already fully expressed as the Force. You're trying to breathe through a medium that's already saturated. Bart leaned forward. Can I draw on the Force directly? Use it to supplement what I'm losing? Not without training that would take years. Wes paused. But there may be another approach. Rather than drawing on the Force as a power source, you might learn to move through it, the way water moves through water. Stop trying to maintain a separate channel. Let the Force carry your Speed Force resonance instead of fighting against its current. That sounds like it could go very wrong. Most things worth attempting do. Wes looked at Cade with an expression that contained several layers of meaning he visibly chose not to engage with. It would require meditation, guidance, and time we may not have. They didn't have time. The alert came through Morgan's sensors 4 hours into their conversation. Imperial Star Destroyers, dropping out of hyperspace in the system, too many of them for a routine patrol, moving with the coordinated precision of a targeted operation. Someone had tracked the Minix hyperspace jump. Someone with resources significant enough to vector an Imperial fleet to a backwater jungle world. Nile, Cade said flatly. Not just Nile. Morgan was at the sensor console, her expression carefully controlled, in the way of someone processing very bad news very quickly. The flagship configuration. That's a command ship. She turned. Darth Krayt is here. The silence that followed had weight. Bart looked at the sensor display showing the fleet forming up in orbit. Then at Cade, then at Wes. He had read enough about Darth Krayt in his accelerated research to understand the specific quality of the fear that had settled over the room. A Sith Lord who had rebuilt an entire order from nothing, conquered a galaxy, survived death through sheer will and using Vong biotechnology. A being who had been fighting wars since before any person currently in this outpost had been born. A being who had come personally for him. The comm activated without being opened, a Force channel, broadcasting on frequencies that bypass standard encryption. The voice that came through was not what Bart expected. Not theatrical darkness, not the performed menace of someone performing power. Darth Krayt's voice was old and certain, the voice of someone who had stopped needing to convince anyone of anything a very long time ago. The being of living lightning, Krayt said. I have been watching you since you arrived. What you carry within you is remarkable, an energy source entirely independent of the Force. Do you understand how valuable that is? Bart said nothing. Was made a small gesture. Stay quiet. Keep him talking. by time. The Jedi, Crate continued, will tell you to resist me. The Imperial Knights will tell you to align with their deposed emperor. The rebels who still survive will appeal to your sense of justice. A pause that felt entirely deliberate. I am offering you something none of them can. Understanding. Your power is failing in this galaxy because you are fighting its nature. I have resources, scholars, Sith alchemists, who have spent centuries studying the intersection of technology and the Force. I can stabilize your connection, restore your speed to full capacity, send you home. Another pause, or leave you here, slowly diminishing, until you are nothing but a memory of lightning. Cade looked at Bart. His expression said, "This is the part where you say no." Bart's expression said, "I know, I'm thinking." Because the terrible, uncomfortable truth was that Crate was not entirely wrong. The offer was real, not generous. Not made from any motive except acquiring something useful, but structurally real. Crate had resources that could genuinely address his Speed Force problem, and he was diminishing. The reserves that had partially recovered during hyperspace were already depleting again from the low-level effort of simply maintaining awareness and readiness. Like a battery with a slow drain that couldn't be stopped. He thought about what he'd seen in 2 days on Coruscant. The heads-down civilians, the propaganda banners, the specific texture of fear that a totalitarian order pressed into its population. Like a brand, he thought about the wanted bulletins for Jedi survivors and the casualty lists from Ossus that had scrolled across Cantina news feeds. He thought about Wally, about Barry, about the reason anyone put on a costume and ran toward danger instead of away from it. I appreciate the offer, Bart said into the comm. I do. And I want to be honest with you. You're right that I'm running low, and you're right that I don't fully understand this galaxy yet. He paused. But I've been in situations before where someone powerful offered me something I needed in exchange for something I wasn't willing to give. And I've noticed that the people who make those offers are never actually trying to help you. They're trying to own you. He reached across and closed the comm channel. Cade exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. That was either very brave or very stupid. Can be both, Bart said, echoing his own words from earlier. He'll send troops now. Ground forces, probably Sith blades ahead of them. Cade was already moving, pulling up the outposts. Basic defense grid with the efficient urgency of someone who had defended bad positions before. We have maybe 20 minutes before they breach atmosphere. Was on her feet, her lightsaber in her hand, and she looked at Bart with an expression that had moved past scholarly interest into something more immediate and more human. The technique I described, she said, moving through the Force rather than against it. I cannot teach it to you in 20 minutes. Can you start? Bart asked. She studied him for a long moment. Outside, through the outpost's narrow viewports, the jungle of Vendaxa was doing what it always did, living, fighting, consuming, surviving, indifferent to the Imperial fleet assembling overhead and the specific crisis occurring in one small permacrete structure at the edge of a clearing. Sit, was said. Close your eyes. Stop trying to find your speed. She paused. Let the Force find it for you. Bart Allen, who had never been good at sitting still, sat down cross-legged on the floor of a jungle outpost in a galaxy far from home, closed his eyes, and tried to do something he had never in his life attempted. He tried to be quiet, somewhere in the deep resonance between two fundamental forces of two different universes. Something shifted. It was small, tentative, like the first vibration of a tuning fork finding its frequency. But it was there, a thread of golden light woven suddenly through the Force's vast, breathing network, fragile and new and unmistakably his. Above the jungle, the first dropships broke atmosphere. The dropships came down through Vendaxa's canopy like black rain. 12 of them, military configuration, deploying in a staggered pattern that covered every viable approach to the outpost while simultaneously establishing a perimeter wide enough to prevent hyperspace-capable vessels from breaking atmosphere. Without Imperial interdiction, it was textbook siege deployment, executed with the mechanical precision of an empire that had been conducting military operations continuously for over a century. Stormtroopers hit the jungle floor in disciplined fire teams, moving through undergrowth that immediately began trying to eat them. Vindax's ecosystem did not distinguish between invaders and prey, but disciplined and well-equipped enough to push through anyway. Ahead of them, moving faster and with considerably more purpose, came the Sith. 5 of them, not the agents who had boarded the Minnock. These were genuine Sith blades, the sharpened edge of Crate's one Sith, warriors who had earned their place through years of violence and study and the particular crucible of surviving in an organization where weakness was not tolerated. They moved through the jungle with force-enhanced speed, lightsabers not yet ignited, tracking through senses that operated beyond the physical. Leading them was Darth Nihil himself, tall Nagai, with the pale, angular features of his species and the cold, deliberate focus of a man who had risen to hand of the Emperor. Through a combination of genuine talent and absolute ruthlessness, Nihil moved through the Vindaxa undergrowth with the unhurried certainty of someone who had already calculated the outcome of this engagement. He had studied Bart Allen's energy signature for 2 days. He understood the speed force resonance, its interaction with force lightning, its gradual depletion pattern. He had advised Crate that the being was most dangerous immediately and least dangerous after sustained engagement. The plan was simple. Exhaust him, then take him. Inside the outpost, Bart opened his eyes. The thread he had found during Wes's brief urgent guidance was still there, thin as spider silk, new as morning, but real. He could feel it differently now. Not the muffled, filtered trickle of a speed force connection straining against an incompatible universe, but something interwoven, supported, carried by the force's vast network. The way a small current is carried by a great river. It wasn't full capacity. It wasn't anything close to what he could do at home, in his own dimension, with a complete speed force connection and no dimensional interference. But it was stable in a way it hadn't been since his arrival. And stability, right now, was worth more than raw power. He stood and looked at Cade and Wes. "How long do we need?" he asked. Cade was checking his blaster, a habit, the weapon already confirmed ready, but something to do with his hands. "The Minnock can break atmosphere if I can get to it. And by 30 seconds of clear air. The interdiction field has gaps if you know where to look. And I know where to look." He paused. "Getting to the ship is the problem. It's on the other side of the perimeter." "I'll get you to the ship," Bart said. "Through 12 dropships and 5 Sith blades." "Through 12 dropships and 5 Sith blades," Bart confirmed. Wes looked at him with the careful assessment of a Jedi Master, evaluating a capability she had never encountered before and would likely spend years thinking about afterward. "The technique will hold," she said quietly, "but pushing hard against force lightning will still drain you. If Nihil uses it directly." "Then I don't let Nihil use it directly," Bart said. "Speed solves a lot of problems if you apply it correctly." He pulled the flash suit fully into place. The red and gold that had no business existing in this galaxy, that belonged to a universe of different heroes and different crises in a central city that felt very far away, and felt something settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the speed force or its force-assisted stabilization. Something older than power. The reason for the suit. The reason for all of it. He thought about Jay Garrick, who had been the Flash before anyone else. About Barry, who had died running and come back because the universe apparently needed him. About Wally, who had carried the legacy with a grace Bart had spent years trying to learn. About himself, impulse, reckless and brilliant and chronically underestimated, who had grown into something steadier without entirely losing the electricity that made him himself. He was a Flash, in a galaxy that had never heard of the Flash. That would have to be enough. "Stay close to me," he told Cade and Wes. "As close as you physically can. I'll be moving fast, but I need you in contact range to carry you. If you lose contact, stop moving and I'll come back for you." He looked at Cade specifically. "Don't try to fight anything I'm already dealing with. You'll be in my way before you're in theirs." Cade opened his mouth, closed it, and nodded with the expression of a man making a significant concession. They went out the back. What happened in the next 4 minutes in the jungles of Vindaxa was something that Stormtrooper after-action reports would struggle to accurately describe for weeks afterward. Standard military language had no adequate vocabulary for what the troopers' helmet sensors recorded, a red and gold blur moving through their perimeter at velocities that made weapons targeting essentially theoretical. carrying two passengers in contact. Grip while simultaneously dismantling their defensive formation from the inside. Fire teams lost their flanking partners. Defensive positions found their occupants absent. Without the occupants being aware of having moved, communication lines went down not because of jamming, but because the physical relay points had been repositioned. While nobody was looking, Vendax's ecosystem contributed chaos of its own. The Sith's aggressive advance through the undergrowth had disturbed enough of the native predator population that the jungle itself was now actively hostile to the Imperial forces. Massive creatures crashing through the perimeter in directions that had nothing to do with the outpost and everything to do with territorial fury. The combination of Bart's systematic dismantling and the jungle's indiscriminate hostility reduced a textbook siege operation to controlled pandemonium. In under 90 seconds, Nal found him anyway. The Sith hand stepped out of the undergrowth, directly into Bart's path with the precision of someone who had been tracking not his physical location but his trajectory, calculating where he would be, rather than where he was. The Force lightning came immediately, no preamble, no speech. A sustained crackling discharge, aimed not at Bart, but at the space he was moving through, turning his own speed into a liability by forcing him to run through the strike rather than around it. Bart dropped Cade and Wes and took the hit. The pain was extraordinary. Force lightning against a speed force connection was not like electricity against a human nervous system. It was deeper, more fundamental, attacking the resonance that Wes had helped him stabilize and sending fractures through the force-woven thread like cracks through ice. His reserves dropped sharply, dramatically, in a way that left his vision briefly white and his legs momentarily uncertain. He stayed on his feet. Nile advanced, sustaining the lightning, and his expression showed something that might have been respect in a different context. "Remarkable," he said. "You're still standing." Bart said, through teeth clenched against the ongoing discharge, taken hits from people who could crack planets. He moved on the last word. Not fast. He didn't have fast left. Not the kind of fast that made targeting impossible. But Nile had been calculating for speed, had built his entire engagement strategy around a being that moved faster than force precognition could track. And what he got instead was something his calculations hadn't included. Bart Allen moving at merely very fast human speeds, inside his lightning's effective range before the strike could redirect, and hitting him with every ounce of remaining kinetic force in a single focused strike to the center of his chest. Nile went backward through approximately 40 feet of Vendaxa undergrowth and did not immediately get up. Bart stood in the small clearing the impact had created, breathing hard, his speed force reserves sitting at the lowest point they had touched since his arrival. The force-woven stabilization thread frayed, but barely, critically, intact. Cade appeared at his shoulder, lightsaber ignited, scanning for the remaining Sith blades who were converging on Nile's last position. "The ship," Bart said. They ran. Not at superhuman speed. Bart was past that, running on the dregs of something he would need days to recover, but at the desperate, committed pace of people who understood exactly what was behind them and exactly what the alternative was. The Minix landing platform appeared through the tree line, the ship's systems already powering up as Cade sent the activation signal ahead of them, and the remaining Sith blades that had been moving to intercept pulled up short as Wes turned and ignited her own lightsaber, buying 30 seconds of clear approach with the quiet, devastating competence of a master who had survived long enough to know exactly how much was needed and how to spend it precisely. They hit the boarding ramp at full pace. The Minix broke atmosphere 45 seconds later, threading the interdiction field's gap with the reckless precision of a pilot who knew these ships' sensor blind spots intimately, and the Imperial fleet's response, immediate, coordinated, lethal, arrived at their last position 3 seconds after they were no longer there. In hyperspace, in the sudden impossible silence of a universe between points, Bart sat on the floor of the common area with his back against the wall and his hands open in his lap, feeling the force-woven thread in his speed-force connection pulse slowly, steadily, damaged but alive. Cade sat across from him, said nothing for a long moment. "You're going to need time to recover," Cade said finally. "I know." Crate isn't going to stop. Whatever you are, whatever that energy signature means. He wants it. Cade turned his battered cup over in his hands. Which means you're stuck with me until we figure out how to get you home. Because you going off alone right now is just giving him an easy target. Bart looked at him. You're offering to help me. I'm stating a tactical reality. A pause. They're the same thing. Was appeared in the doorway, her lightsaber dark, her expression carrying the particular quiet of someone who had just spent considerable force energy and was conserving what remained. She looked at Bart with the scholar's assessment still present, but overlaid now with something warmer and less categorizable. The thread held, she said. The thread held, Bart confirmed. She nodded slowly. Then we have something to work with. Outside the viewport, hyperspace streamed past in ribbons of impossible blue-white light, familiar to everyone on this ship, alien to one of them, and beautiful to all of them regardless. Somewhere behind them, in real space, Darth Crate's fleet was already repositioning, already recalculating, already sending new orders across the galaxy-spanning network of the One Sith. The Emperor was patient. He had survived death itself through patience and will. A speedster from another dimension with a damaged power source was not a problem that required urgency. It required inevitability. Bart Allen, who had outrun inevitability before, stared at the hyperspace light and thought about home, about the Speed Force, about a thread of gold woven through a force he was only beginning to understand, fragile as new ice and stubborn as everything that had ever made him a Flash. He thought about the next move. In a galaxy that had seen 1,000 years of war, the arrival of one speedster from beyond the stars should have been a footnote, a curiosity, an anomaly to be cataloged and contained. Instead, Bart Allen's collision with the Legacy era left marks that rippled outward in ways no one, not Crate, not the scattered Jedi, not the Imperial Knights serving their exiled Emperor, had fully calculated. He had exposed a vulnerability in Niall's tactical thinking. He had given Cade Skywalker a reason, however reluctantly accepted, to engage with something larger than his own survival. He had shown was that the Force was broader than any single galaxy's understanding of it, that somewhere, across the dimensional barrier, the same fundamental energy wore a different face and ran at a different frequency, and that the implications of that truth were vast enough to spend a lifetime unpacking. And Darth Crate, sitting in the silence of his meditation chamber aboard his flagship, felt the hyperspace jump of one small freighter and did not pursue. Not yet. Instead, he thought about an energy source independent of the Force, about what that independence meant for a being whose power was built entirely on Force mastery, about patience as a weapon. Somewhere in hyperspace, a speedster from another universe was learning to run through the Force instead of against it. The galaxy had no idea what that would eventually mean. Neither did he. May the Force be with you.